beginning as a framing element, but I appreciate that. You're exactly right. Mr. Chair?
Yep, thank you. And first, let me ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 7 statements outlining stakeholder food is medicine priorities. Without objection, so ordered. Recognize Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with Mr. Williams. What obstacles exist that block us from harnessing personalized medicine today?
I think that building on the last point, when we look, at least from the entrepreneurial standpoint, the startups that we see, when you're a startup in this space, you have to make a decision whether you're going to be in the CMS lane or not.
Okay.
And if you're going to be in the CMS lane, then you got to comply with how it works. And there are things I know the entrepreneurs do that are not what they know is right for the patient, but is right because of the structure of how CMS works. It's not a criticism of CMS. It's really that they're there to deal with sick people, not proactive. So I think that that front end on CMS and also on FDA's standpoint in terms of what is nutrition, there are medical claims that we see in the new products that have more nutritional density that can't be made because when you go into FDA, it falls into a level of approvals that make it very difficult for an entrepreneur bringing new products to market to get through that buzzsaw. So I think both FDA and CMS and that front end, if we're expecting stuff to come from the innovators into this space, they need that pathway cleaned up a little bit or they got to go it alone and that's got to take longer.
Okay, all right. Ms. Martin, how would you handle the reimbursement part of this? What would you suggest that we should do to better reimburse for the food as medicine component?
The reimbursement should absolutely be integrated into the healthcare model. There are about 14 states that are either pending or have already passed 1115 waivers that are implemented into state Medicaid, and there's already Medicare and Medicare Advantage programs offering this as a reimbursable. I would think that it would need to be a pre-authorization for at least a year, and that would be paid up front to cover the food and the education.
Are you seeing with any ACOs?
I have not.
Okay, all right. Dr. Mazafarian, we got to talk about milk just for a second. You know, I'm kind of the champion of whole milk up here. Can you just speak a little bit? Have you done any research about whole milk, which, by the way, tastes better and the kids actually drink it, and we're going to have a whole new generation of boys and girls that develop osteopenia, osteoporosis at a much younger age. So how do you feel about whole milk, and what does your research show?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I got into nutrition was in the 90s when I was doing my medical training. It was the height of the low-fat diet recommendations. And when I read the science to educate myself as a doctor who wasn't receiving training on nutrition, the science in the 90s didn't support a low-fat diet. And so we were doing the best we could, but the science was, the policy was 10, 20 years behind the science. And so I knew right then that I had to really understand dietary fats. And so I've done a lot of research on dietary fats. And I think, although most Americans don't realize this, the dietary guidelines have quietly dropped the focus on low total fat. There is no longer a focus on low total fat in the dietary guidelines, which is appropriate. There's still a focus on low saturated fat, which I think is misguided and not actually supported by the evidence. And I hope the current dietary guidelines fixes that. But what that does is make recommendations for low-fat or non-fat dairy. And we've done research using observational studies, using biomarker studies, using meta-analysis, looking at a range of types of studies. And there's no evidence that low-fat or non-fat dairy is healthier than whole-fat dairy. There's some evidence that whole-fat dairy may be healthier than non-fat dairy, even the other way. And so from my perspective, we don't have enough evidence to only recommend low-fat or non-fat dairy. We should be telling people to eat what they choose, and we need more science. And I think the second point I would make is there's more interesting evidence about the type of dairy, and so fermented dairy, like yogurt with probiotics or cheese, which is actually the top fermented food consumed in the U.S., may be particularly healthful. And so I think we need more research on fermented dairy foods.
Yeah, and remind everybody that with the whole milk, you can absorb the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. So it just makes sense to me, especially for my pregnant moms, to let them have whole milk. Go back to Mr. Williams. Talk a little bit more about regenerative crops and nutrient-dense food. What does that mean to you, and how do we get to them, and do they taste better?
Yeah, so you can imagine that just evolution, says if something is more nutrient dense, you would want it to taste better, so you remember to eat it 200,000 years ago. So it is the case that taste and nutritional density tend to correlate with each other in crops. What we have found is that nutritional quality tends to come from the soil. So if you enhance the soil microbiome, you tend to have more nutrients available, the more nutrient uptake. Farmers are learning a lot better how to balance both synthetic fertilizer and the microbiome, and shifting into a mindset where regenerative is working. Further, what Aaron has been seeing is that you can grow those crops in amongst existing agricultural products. So someone who's a 200,000 acre row crop farmer can also put 2 or 3 acres in work around regenerative, and then that supply chain is more local. It can be done 10 months out of the year, and then directly supply rural areas with more nutrient dense. But ultimately, that nutrition comes from the soil.
Yep. Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say again, thank you for letting us have this hearing. I'll kind of circle back to one of the statements you made that FDR was concerned about the malnutrition incidence in this country. I would postulate our incidence of malnutrition today is higher than it was in the 1940s. We have plenty of calories. That's not what I'm talking about. But the nutrition quality of our diet has deteriorated for a lot of reasons. I wish I could wave my hand and fix this. This is something I've worked on for 30 years and still struggle to find that perfect place. And congratulations to the folks that are finding success doing it, implementing. That's not easily done. So congratulations to you all. Thanks again to all of our participants today for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator, very much. And my father was actually a milkman.
There you go.
So the one thing we got was whole milk